research involving the influence of adverse childhood experiences and regular physical activity on the symptoms of depression. So what are adverse childhood experiences? According to Liu et al. In 2021, these events affect nearly half of all children in the United States. And while childhood trauma is a vast field, adverse childhood experiences focus on 11 events. And these are parental divorce, drug use or alcoholism in the home, a member of the household spending time in prison, a member of the household suffering from depression, domestic violence in the home, a child being hit, a child being sworn at, a child being touched sexually, a child being forced to touch another sexually, and a child being forced to have sex. Depression is on the rise in our country. The America Health Rankings in 2020 found that 19% of the population has been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And according to the CDC, in 2019, 4 of the top 10 leading causes of death, which are respiratory disease, heart disease, cancer, and suicide, can be linked to ACE events. And according to Van Duyn et al. In 2018, the more ACE events that an individual has, the higher the severity of symptoms they experience. And these symptoms include feelings of worthlessness, guilt, loss of appetite, and fatigue. Race. According to Dunlop et al. In 2003, Caucasians are less likely to report depression than Black or Hispanics. And Black and Hispanics are more likely to experience ACE events and a higher amount of ACE events than Caucasian individuals. And according to Liu et al. In 2021 as well, this could be due to the fact that there is a higher rate of ACE events in communities of color and low-income communities. Regular physical activity has been shown to decrease the symptoms of depression. Mendez-Jimenez et al. In 2020 found that participants who exercised 3 times a week had a 50% reduction in their symptoms of depression. And the activity that they measured was a generalized activity outside of work, such as walking, riding a bike, climbing, hiking. And I had 3 hypotheses for my research. The first one being that individuals with a history of adverse childhood experiences are more likely to report depression and have a greater severity of symptoms than individuals without ACEs. My second hypothesis was that Caucasian individuals will be less likely to be diagnosed with depression compared to Black and Hispanic individuals. And my third hypothesis being that regular physical activity will moderate the relationship between ACEs and depression such that this relationship will be weaker among those with greater physical activity. For my methods, I actually used a publicly accessible database called the Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System that's conducted annually by multiple agencies, including the CDC and all 50 states. I used the most recent survey that's been released, which is the 2020 survey. And the questions that I analyzed from this survey were the number of poor mental health days that are experienced in the past 30 days, whether or not they were told to have depression, any activity that outside of work, whether it be 1 day or all 30 days, just if you had any activity whatsoever, and then the 11 ACE questions. And there were 401,958 participants. And as you can see, 45.8% were male with 54.2% female. All participants were over the age of 18, and they were contacted either by cell phone or landline. For my first hypothesis, after conducting a chi-square analysis, I found that those with ACE events are more likely to be told that they have depression, with 25% who were told they had depression had an ACE event. And 9.9% who were told they have depression did not have an ACE event. And the significance was very large with a p-value of 0.000. And then also a t-test found that the average days of poor mental health experienced by someone with an ACE event was 5.5 days compared to those with no ACE event at 2.7 days. The race results were actually pretty interesting. While Black and Hispanics report more days of poor mental health, I actually found that white participants were more likely to be told that they have depression. But the interesting part was that multiracial actually had the greatest impact with, they showed the highest number of poor mental health days and the highest rates of being told to have depression. And for my third hypothesis, I conducted an analysis of variance, which found that exercise does help lower the number of days of poor mental health, and that those who had an ACE event were shown to have an even larger reduction in those days. I conducted a correlational study and found that ACE events do influence the severity of the symptoms of depression, and that physical activity can alleviate these symptoms, and that it is worse among the multiracial community. For future studies, I recommend doing a longitudinal study, since you can't force trauma on somebody. And I do fear, though, that in any study, the fear of disclosure and the sensitive nature of the topic can skew the results, as people may be hesitant or choose to withdraw their honesty on whether or not they experience any of these events. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm curious if you, in your research, you came across any statistics that show differences in exercise rates among individuals identifying as Black and Hispanic, and if there is, why might that be?
There was not. The study was very limited in the amount of questions that it asked regarding exercise, with it just being the one on whether they exercise or not. Yes.
I wondered about possibly the sense of purpose with the exercise itself, like doing it for the sake of some sort of goal rather than for just 30 minutes because you're supposed to every day.
No, there's, the survey was very limited with its questions, as I said. So it didn't go into much detail beyond just asking if you exercise. Because the interviews were conducted by phone, and so there's only so much you can get from a phone interview.
So you were working, of course, with existing archival data, so you couldn't add questions to it. Had you had the liberty to design the survey yourself, what additional pieces of information would you like to collect and why?
I would like to have gone more in depth on the physical activity and had a control group where there was no activity and the activity to see if there is more of an impact than just what I was able to do. So I would like to do an actual experiment where I am collecting data instead of relying on the data collected by others.
So several minutes for additional questions, if anybody has any.
So the questionnaire that was used, that focused on, like when it came to depression, it was about someone else telling them that they had depression, is that?
Yes.
So So it
It
wasn't
did-
about like their own subjective experiences, like whether or not someone else had all of them?
Yeah, it was, just whether or not you were told you had depression, and
Okay.
it did not indicate who told you.
Okay.
So it does, I couldn't tell you if it was a medical professional or not, it was
Okay.
just whether or not you were told.
Do you think the results would have been a little bit different if it was more about someone's personal experience? Because when I saw that, I thought about like disparities in mental health treatment and how people in, you know, from, you know, different backgrounds may not have the same access to mental health, and therefore maybe no one ever told them they had depression because they never saw a mental health professional.
Yes, I do. Yeah, one of the studies that I looked into, that found that there were more ACE events in communities of color and low-income communities. I, thought it'd be interesting to look into if they weren't told that they had depression because they didn't have access to those resources. Yes.
I think I read in a more recent study regarding ACEs that they were considering or have already considered adding racial trauma to the list of possible ACEs you can have. And I was wondering like what your thoughts would be regarding how to evaluate whether or not like a racial trauma ACE would have an impact on the results that you got.
From the results I got from my own race variable, I would believe that there would be an impact if they included a racial aspect towards ACE events. Yes.
You mentioned that the participants said how many bad days that they've had. Was there like a definition for what that meant for them to work on, or were they going off of their own idea of what a bad day was?
Their own ideas.
When looking at the participants, what was the split between like the male and female identifying, if you know of one?
If they had an ACE event or not,
Yeah.
I don't know that.
All right, thank you very much.